Hi, my name is Elaine Holden, and this is Education Matters on Channel 96, Nashua, New Hampshire. Thank you for joining me today. I've been on this show for a few weeks now, and I've had people ask me, well, how do you get your ideas? How do you get your topics? Sometimes it's something I read, or maybe a neighbor or a friend or a family member suggests a topic. Sometimes it just happens. And this week, it kind of just happened. So let me explain what I'm talking about. I was in church last week, and we have a variety of different committees in my church, and one of them is the Social Justice Committee. And we have a social justice candle. And a member of the committee every week in church lights the social justice candle and then speaks very briefly about something that's of importance to the community, to the various people in the church, maybe to the greater world. So this past week, the member of the Social Justice Committee that had the candle was talking about a letter writing campaign. And a number of churches around the United States have gathered together to, after church, write letters to people who have the ability to vote, but don't very often. And it's just little notes of encouragement. You know, elections are coming up. We'd love to see you go to the polls and vote for your candidates. And this is a very worthwhile thing because this is one of our rights as American citizens. We get to vote in our elections. And so we want to encourage people to vote every single chance they get, because that's what keeps our democracy strong. It's not voting for one party or another. Nobody's pushing a party. What we're saying is get out and vote. Make your voice heard, which I thought was a great idea. And then at the end, she said, there's just one thing you have to remember, that when you're writing these letters, everything has to be printed. Now, I have to tell you, I am a fellow in the Academy of Orton-Gillingham Practitioners and Educators. Those are the folks, or we are the folks, that teach multisensory reading, writing, and spelling. Multisensory means auditory, visual, tactile, kinesthetic. If I don't have the opportunity to have children with pens or pencils in their hands and making those letters as we are creating the sound patterns, etc., you know, you've cut me off the knees basically because you've taken away one of the modalities that I teach to. So handwriting for me is very important because it helps me teach reading and writing and spelling. I'm also a member of the International Association of Master Penmen, Engrossers, and Teachers of Handwriting. And this is an international group that promotes, are you ready? Cursive handwriting. Because that's what we do in Orton-Gillingham as well. We do cursive handwriting. I also know that if I'm in church, I don't stand up in the pew and yell, "What are you talking about?" in the middle of a service. I held it in. I was really proud of myself because by this time I'm really upset. So I cornered her after church. We had a coffee hour, and I went over and said, "Julie, what's the story here?" And she said, quite frankly, all of the church representatives got together, discussed this with emails and Zoom conferences and everything, and we all realized that most of the people in a very broad age range don't know cursive. They can't write in cursive, and they can't read cursive. So I pursued this a little bit more. I checked with some various professors. I've been a professor for a long time, talked to a few others, and sure enough, they all found that when they write notes on their students' papers and they write it in cursive, the students have confessed, "I can't read it. I don't even bother." So the teachers, the professors, have to print everything so that their graduate students will be able to understand what they're saying. Is this right? Is this something that we should, as citizens, as teachers, as people that really think a lot of writing, can agree to. Personally, no, I cannot. And I have a lot of reasons for this. First and foremost, one of the most important things that we do in reading instruction is do what's called sound symbol association. And I've talked a lot on this show about the importance of phonology and the 45 sounds and learning those 45 sounds. But then we have to map those sounds to the letters. We've got 26 letters in the alphabet. And those 26 letters and combinations of letters make what we say are phonograms. So you have different ways to spell the same sound, basically. So if you have fish and you have the f in fish and you spell it with an F, that's great. It's the Anglo-Saxon. But if you have the f in phone, it's spelled with digraph PH. Why? Because it comes from the Greek language. So if you know which language the word comes from, and you have a pretty good idea of the sound symbol association, you know that you spell phone with digraph PH and you spell fish with just plain old letter F. And you know if you have a single syllable base word with a short vowel sound followed by the F sound, you spell it with two Fs. That's pretty simple, it's straightforward, it's like rules, right? And English, believe it or not, is based on pretty much rules. We only have maybe 4 or 5% of the words that don't follow the rules. So English is really a very rule-based language, which is good because it helps with the spelling and the reading. Be that as it may, the handwriting piece is absolutely essential for this. And one of the things we see, of course, is the research about this. This isn't just my cranky idea. This isn't just me, going back to the 1950s or 1940s. And, somebody made a joke and said, well, gee, do you have a bomb shelter in your backyard too? And I'm like, no, I don't have a bomb shelter, and I don't actually churn my own butter either. The bottom line is, if you want to stay with the times, you have to pay attention to what the research says. And the research very clearly says cursive handwriting is important. One of the important things about it is that it helps associate shape and sound. And this association really, with using the cursive, helps to integrate better. It helps the child learn better, learn sound symbol better. And it also develops a level of automaticity that children need to have when they're writing. We don't just sit there and say, make this letter. We have language that goes with it. And let me explain what I'm talking about. When I am writing, for example, my name, I start on the line up here and I make an E. I scoop out. So I've made my E. Sweep way up, stop, pull straight down, and my release stroke now goes into under over stop, trace back around, up, down. My release stroke goes into sweep up, stop, pull straight down. My release stroke goes into up and over, trace up and over, and my release stroke goes into loop up, pull down, release, and then dot. Now I've just done my name. I did upside down, and that's okay. The thing is, I have made my name in cursive. I started on the line after I got done with my capital E, and I didn't get off the line until I finished the word, which means if I'm starting another word, I have a better chance of putting my finger here, or actually I'm going to put this finger here, and then I'll start a new word, okay? For example, is. So I can start my sentence. Now, this is a level of automaticity that we want for our children, because they're hearing me saying all of those different cues for every single movement, for every single letter. We don't change those cue words. So when the child is writing, and the child is asked, for example, to spell, we will say, and this is in multisensory reading now, we'll say pit. The child says pit, p, it. So they tap. They've made 3 taps, so they know there are 3 phonemes. They also know that p is with the letter P, I, T. And they've made the word pit, but to get to that point, especially if they're dyslexic or have other issues, they honestly have to be able to say, sweep up, stop, pull straight down, loop back, up, around, close. It's in their head. It's my language in their head that they're hearing. And it's this language in the head that they're hearing that makes such a difference for them, because it becomes automatic. They've language labeled every movement. And this language labeling of the movement allows them to develop spelling and writing, and that level of automaticity allows them to then start thinking about what they're going to write. So they're not putting all of their cognitive energy into how do I make this letter. Now, how about those kids who have visual issues or figure ground issues or hand-eye coordination issues? Do you ever see those kids? You know, you're supposed to write the letter I from the top down and then T from the top down and cross. And these kids find themselves on the line and they go up, and then they find themselves on the line and they go up again. How about the ones that write N backwards? Have you ever seen those kids? Because they need to ground, they need a place that they can anchor, and they cannot find themselves on the middle spot between the 2 lines. This is an issue. This is an issue that isn't going away. We have at least 20% of our population struggling to be able to read and write. And remember, according to the New Hampshire Department of Ed website, what have we got? We've got 51% of our 4th graders below grade level in reading. Well, if they're below grade level in reading, how well do you think they're spelling and writing? Probably even worse, because reading is actually easier than spelling and writing. So we have children that are in pretty bad shape, and they have not been trained to work in cursive. They have not been given the opportunity to develop their cursive skills. It's not just in New Hampshire. It's all across the country. And I have to go back to research, and I have to say, what does the research say? Well, 45 years ago, the research was very clear. Something happens in your brain when you use cursive handwriting. This something is very beneficial. It's very positive for the human brain. It started out with some pretty unusual research, as a matter of fact. Actually, I had the opportunity to sit back and watch the new research coming out. I was acquainted with some of the researchers that were really getting involved with this. And believe it or not, they had music playing in a fairly dim room. The music happened to be Gregorian chants because it's 60 beats a minute. And the people were asked to write their name backward. And so they were working with a backwards cursive. This backwards cursive activity, done correctly, got different brain waves going. Those brain waves showed the researchers that something unusual, something unique was happening in the brain. And the further testing that was done showed that it was a very positive thing for the brain. And this was the beginnings of the research on how handwriting, cursive handwriting, enhances brain activity, enhances cognitive growth, enhances neuroplasticity, makes your brain think differently. We always talk about it's important for the kids. Now, I have to say, taking it out of the frameworks in Massachusetts, taking cursive out of the frameworks in Massachusetts in the schools was a very bad idea. There's always been a push to take it out of the New Hampshire schools. Right now, we still have it. It's in the 3rd grade, usually about that area. And it's depending upon the teacher. Some teachers have excellent cursive and train the children quite nicely. Others have very poor cursive and do a bad job at it. But after the maybe 3rd, 4th grade, it's really not well reinforced. And the excuse has always been, well, you know what, we're going to use keyboarding. That's wonderful because, yes, we all keyboard. I certainly do a lot of my work on a computer. I'm not disputing that. But think of the number of times that we have to write something down, that we don't have a computer or a tablet available to us. And this is what I'm talking about, that if we write something, we should be writing it in cursive. You know, we have 4 different alphabets in English. We have the cursive uppercase and the cursive lowercase, and we have the print or manuscript uppercase and the manuscript lowercase. It's called majuscule and minuscule. Those are the fancy words for it. But what does it mean? It means that we have 4 separate alphabets, and children are going to be confronted with every single one of those alphabets. We read the printed alphabet, we write with the cursive alphabets. And this allows for that flexibility of thinking in the brain. It allows for brain growth. We also know that when children write things in cursive, they feel more mature. They feel like they're becoming grown-ups because they know things even like the Declaration of Independence happen to have been written in cursive. So they're feeling more grown up, and it's a new thing. It's a very positive thing when it's handled correctly. And this is my point, that children really look forward to learning cursive. My other point is, you know, at the beginning of World War I, a gentleman in England decided that children weren't learning to read correctly. And so he wanted the children to learn to print, not because he wanted them to communicate with print, but because he wanted them to learn sound symbol association, something that we take for granted today, but was a brand new thing back in, you know, 1910, 1920, somewhere in that zone, okay? So what he wound up doing was bringing this to all of the teachers in England, and the teachers in England are like, no, everybody has to learn cursive because that's what we do. Well, they're not wrong, but he wanted to teach sound symbol association, and he wanted to change the reading instruction. He came to America after World War I, and he brought this idea to America. And he explained the importance of it to the teachers in America, and they went right in with it. That was great. But they misunderstood. It wasn't so that the children could print and write in print, in manuscript. It was so that the children would learn better sound symbol association. We know from muscle development in the hand that it's better for children to learn cursive first, and then when they're in about grade 5 or grade 6, they can learn to print. But they can learn to print if obviously they're having sound symbol issues. Hopefully you get in there beforehand to do your intervention, but just in case the children want to learn to print, that's fine in the 5th or 6th grade, but not before. And so the research that this man brought from England to the United States was for reading instruction, not writing instruction. It was to reinforce the individual letters and what those letters represent for sounds, helping with that mapping process. Be that as it may, we now have that push to do everything in print. Teachers misunderstood, professors misunderstood. Everybody's now doing print instead of cursive, but the research does not reinforce this expectation. It's a great idea somebody had for reading instruction. It's not a great idea for writing instruction. Cursive is still the way to go. We use it in Orton-Gillingham. A real Orton-Gillingham program will include cursive handwriting instruction with all of those words, all of those phrases that I demonstrated earlier in this show as to how we teach and how children develop that understanding of the shape of the letters so that they have very good, very legible handwriting. This is an important aspect. This is something that we in the field really feel is one of the most important things that we can do for our children. So what else do we have to do? Well, we also have to think about going all into those senior years as well. And so now the question is, for those of us that are in those senior years, those people who learned cursive in school and had to use cursive all the way through school, it's very natural for us to still use cursive. But let's go back for the research just a minute. We've also seen that the neuroplasticity in the brain continues on well into the adult life. In fact, all the way through the lifespan. And to keep that brain supple, to keep that brain available for learning, to really reinforce that neuroplasticity, to help stave off dementia, we want to find ways that we can use our brain daily to make sure that our brain is as supple and as available as possible. And what do we find? Well, we find three things that are important. The first thing is reading aloud for 10 minutes a day. You can read aloud to yourself, you can read aloud to somebody else, you can read aloud to your pet. But reading aloud for the prosody, for the cadence, for that sense of expression is one of the most important things we can do to keep our brains supple. The next is to do 10 minutes of simple math. I'm not saying algebra, I'm saying addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and maybe doing a couple of word problems. 10 minutes, that's it. So I've got 10 minutes of reading aloud, and you might like it so much you'd do it more. And then I've got 10 minutes of math, not algebra, simple math, where you're starting to really get your brain cooking again. You're not using a calculator. You're forcing your brain to remember those multiplication tables. You're forcing your brain to remember how to do long division. That's keeping your brain supple. And what's number three? Well, this is really great. Number three is writing in cursive for 10 minutes a day. So I've got 10 and 10 and 10. That's half an hour. That's half an hour you exercise your brain. Most people say, wow, I walk for half an hour, or I'm on the treadmill for 40 minutes. You're exercising your body. Don't forget your brain. And your brain's exercise benefits tremendously from cursive handwriting. If you've never done cursive, you can start to learn. There's actually books out there, or you can certainly look in the International Association of Master Penmen, Engrossers, and Teachers of Handwriting. We're more than happy to help you with that. And there's all kinds of workshops, all kinds of books. The important thing is, though, that it's the cursive that makes the difference, not the print. And using cursive 10 minutes a day, it's easy to sit down and write an email to somebody. It's real easy to text a message, and we do it all the time. I know I email, I text. I spend a lot of time shooting out emails to people. But I also write notes in cursive to friends and family. Why? Because I know that I am making my brain do an activity that's keeping my brain supple, that is enforcing that neuroplasticity, and that is really nice to communicate with friends and family. People still like getting letters. And yeah, most of my friends and family are able to read cursive, which is great, and they write back to me in cursive because we know that those 10 minutes a day make a difference. That's what the research says. It's not somebody's grand idea. It is the research. And the research is clear for children as well. Children benefit tremendously from learning cursive, having cursive handwriting reinforced through the grades, and supporting these children in their work using cursive. We don't have to make a big deal of it. We just simply say, we will write this in cursive. If they have been instructed correctly, if they've been given the appropriate training, they're not going to have a problem with it. They're going to feel just fine with it. It's easier to write in cursive than it is in print. You're not taking your pen or pencil off the page and putting it back on. It's not up and down, up and down, up and down. It is across a line, starting on a line, ending on a line, that allows the children to have that nice flow of the text. And when you do it so that you have the instruction to the level of automaticity, then these children can spend more time thinking about what they want to write. They're not laboring over how to write it. They're not laboring about finding their way in those lines, between the lines of expectations on the paper. They're starting on the line, they're ending on the line, and they're able to anchor their pencil or pen, and it really makes a difference for them. I cannot emphasize enough how important this skill, this training is. And so, yes, we're all writing letters in our churches to people that we would like to see go out and vote, no matter what your political party is. We're all printing those letters, we're printing those little notes to folks because we know it's important that the message gets across, and we know it's important that they read it, and we don't want to write it in cursive and not have them read it. So yeah, we're doing it so that they can get the message, so that hopefully they will go out and vote. And that's wonderful. But the big picture is that children need to be taught cursive, and it needs to be reinforced. That's what the research says. We also know that using cursive throughout our lifespan, and especially 10 minutes a day for senior citizens, really supports the neuroplasticity in the brain. It supports the brain staving off dementia. And we can go into those nun studies, the nuns that 40% of them had Alzheimer's, but you couldn't tell because they were active in their communities. They were obviously writing in cursive because that's what nuns do. They were doing all of these different activities, and their brains were able to make pathways around those little barriers that the Alzheimer's had created. This is something we need to think about. We need to think about it long and hard. But in the meantime, do 10 minutes of math every day, simple math. Read out loud to yourself or to your family or even a pet for 10 minutes a day. And write in cursive 10 minutes a day. It's worth it. 30 minutes of mental exercise is just as important as 30 minutes of physical exercise. We get benefit from both. Don't neglect the mental exercise. Exercise well, exercise comfortably, pick up that pen or pencil, write in cursive. You'll be glad you did. Thanks for joining me.